The woman collapsed right in front of the counter, and nobody moved to help her. Daniel Reyes had just walked into the small gas station store with his daughter Mia holding his hand, tired from a long day at work, thinking only about getting home and making dinner. But the moment the glass door closed behind him, he saw an old woman sway on her feet near the counter, her hand gripping a loaf of bread like it was the only thing keeping her standing. Her face had gone pale, her lips were trembling from the cold outside, and her thin coat looked like it had seen too many winters. The young man behind the counter, a boy named Nathan, who could not have been older than 19, was staring at her, with more annoyance than concern. "Ma'am, I already told you. You're short. You need $2 more," Nathan said, his voice flat, like he had said the same thing to 100 people before her, and did not care to say it kindly this time. The old woman did not answer. Her knees buckled slightly, and she caught herself on the edge of the counter. Mia gasped and squeezed her father's hand tighter. Daniel did not think. He acted. He stepped forward, pulled out his wallet, and placed a $10 bill on the counter. "Get her whatever she needs," he said. "The bread, the soup, and add a hot coffee too. She looks freezing." Nathan blinked, surprised, then shrugged and rang up the items. The old woman turned her head slowly and looked at Daniel. Her eyes were sharp, unusually sharp for someone who had just nearly fainted. It was as if the weakness in her body did not match the strength in her gaze. She studied his face carefully, from his tired eyes to the gentle way he kept his daughter close to his side. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Daniel replied with a small smile, "but nobody should stand in the cold hungry. Not while I have $10 in my pocket." The woman's eyes glistened, though she did not cry. She simply nodded, as if she had just confirmed something important to herself. "What is your name, young man?" "Daniel Reyes. And this is my daughter Mia." "Ruth," the woman said simply, offering no last name. "Thank you, Daniel. You have no idea what this means." Daniel assumed she meant the food, the warmth, the small comfort of a stranger's kindness on a cold evening. He had no idea that her words carried a much deeper meaning, one that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. He helped her to a chair near the small heater by the door, made sure she had her coffee and bread, and told Nathan to keep an eye on her until she felt strong enough to walk. Then, because Mia was tugging at his sleeve and reminding him that dinner was waiting, he said his goodbyes and walked out into the night. He did not look back. If he had, he would have seen Ruth watching him through the store window, long after his car pulled away, her sharp eyes following him with an intensity that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with recognition. Daniel drove home with Mia chatting beside him about her day at school, about a drawing she had made, about a friend who had shared her lunch. He listened, laughed at the right moments, and tried to push the image of the shivering old woman out of his mind. He had done what he could. That was enough, or so he told himself. But that night, after Mia had gone to sleep and the house had grown quiet, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about Ruth's eyes. There had been something in the way she looked at him. Not just gratitude, something closer to recognition, like she had been searching for someone and had just found them. He shook his head at the thought. He was tired. His mind was playing tricks on him. Being a single father for the past 3 years, ever since his wife Elena had passed away in a car accident, had taught him to expect nothing from the world except more responsibility, more bills, more sleepless nights spent worrying about whether he was doing enough for Mia. Kindness, to Daniel, was not something he did for a reward. It was something he did because Elena had taught him to. She used to say that the world became a little softer every time someone chose to be kind without expecting anything back. He had carried that belief with him through the hardest years of his life, and he was not about to stop now, even if it meant giving away his last few dollars to a stranger in a gas station. He finished his tea, washed the cup, and went to check on Mia one more time before heading to bed. She was sleeping peacefully, her small hand curled near her face, a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the familiar mixture of love and exhaustion that came with raising a child alone. He had no way of knowing that across town, in a quiet hotel room, an old woman named Ruth was sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights, making a phone call that would set in motion events neither of them could yet imagine. "I found him," she said softly into the phone. I think I finally found him. The person on the other end asked a question Daniel would never hear. No, Ruth answered. He does not know who I am, and that is exactly why I know he is the right one. She hung up the phone and continued to watch the lights of the city, thinking about the tired young father and his daughter, about the kindness in his eyes that could not be faked, about the years she had spent searching for someone exactly like him. The next morning, Daniel woke up early, made breakfast for Mia, and drove her to school before heading to his job at the local hardware store, where he worked as a manager. The day passed like any other, filled with customers, deliveries, and the steady rhythm of ordinary life. He did not think about Ruth again until he was leaving work that evening, and noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the bus stop across the street. It was her, wrapped in the same thin coat, watching the cars pass by with a patience that seemed unusual for someone waiting in the cold. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before crossing the street. "Ruth?" he called out. "Are you all right? Do you need a ride somewhere?" She looked up at him, and for a brief second, something flickered across her face, surprise perhaps, or maybe satisfaction, before settling into a calm and grateful expression. "That would be very kind of you," she said, "if it is not too much trouble." "Not at all," Daniel replied, already walking toward his car. "Where are you headed?" "Just a few blocks from here. There is a small apartment building near the old library." Daniel nodded and opened the passenger door for her, waiting patiently as she settled into the seat. As he drove, he tried to make light conversation, asking about her day, commenting on the weather, anything to fill the silence. Ruth answered his questions politely, but offered little about herself in return. Instead, she asked questions of her own. "Do you work nearby?" "Yes, at the hardware store on Miller Street. I have been there for almost 6 years now." "And your daughter, Mia, is it? She must be a comfort to you." Daniel smiled at the mention of his daughter. "She is my whole world. Ever since my wife passed, it has just been the two of us. Some days are harder than others, but we manage." Ruth's expression softened, and she looked out the window for a moment before speaking again. "Raising a child alone is not an easy thing. It takes a special kind of strength." "I do not know about strength," Daniel said with a small laugh. "Most days I am just trying to keep up, but we get through it together." They arrived at the apartment building a few minutes later, and Daniel walked Ruth to the entrance, making sure she got inside safely, before returning to his car. As he drove home, he found himself thinking about their conversation, about the quiet dignity and the way she carried herself despite her circumstances. There was something about her that felt different from anyone he had met before, though he could not quite put his finger on what it was. He did not know that Ruth had watched him drive away from her window, taking notes in a small journal she kept hidden in her coat pocket. Notes about his patience, his kindness, the way he had not hesitated to help a stranger not once, but twice. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself thinking about Ruth more often than he expected. He wondered if she was warm enough, if she had enough food, if there was anyone looking after her. He decided that the next time he saw her, he would ask if she needed any help getting settled, or if there was someone he could contact on her behalf. But he did not have to wait long to see her again. Just 2 days later, as he picked Mia up from school, he spotted Ruth sitting on a bench in the small park across from the schoolyard, watching the children play with a distant, thoughtful expression. Mia noticed her too. "Daddy, that is the lady from the store, the one you helped." "Yes, sweetheart, that is Ruth. Can we say hello?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment, before nodding. "Sure, let us go say hello." They walked over together, and Ruth looked up as they approached, a genuine smile spreading across her face when she saw Mia's eager expression. "Well, hello there," Ruth said warmly. "You must be Mia. Your father told me all about you." Mia beamed with pride. "Daddy says I am the best artist in my class." "I would believe that," Ruth said, her eyes crinkling with amusement. "You have very clever eyes. Artists always do." Daniel watched the exchange with a growing sense of warmth in his chest. There was something genuine in the way Ruth spoke to Mia, something that reminded him of the way his own grandmother used to talk to him when he was young, full of patience and quiet wisdom. "Would you like to join us for dinner sometime?" Daniel found himself asking before he had fully thought it through. Nothing fancy, just something home-cooked. It would mean a lot to Mia, and to me as well. Ruth's eyes widened slightly, as if the invitation had caught her off guard, though not entirely unwelcome. Are you certain? I would not want to impose. It would not be an imposition at all, Daniel assured her. We would be glad to have you. Ruth studied his face for a long moment, the same searching look she had given him back at the gas station, before finally nodding. Then I would be honored. As they exchanged details and made plans for the following weekend, neither Daniel nor Mia had any idea that this simple invitation, born from nothing more than genuine kindness, would soon reveal a truth about Ruth that would change all their lives forever. For now, all Daniel knew was that he had made a new friend, someone who seemed to appreciate small gestures of warmth in a world that too often forgot to offer them. He walked Mia home that evening with a lightness in his step he had not felt in a long time, unaware that far away, in a large office building downtown, a group of people were reviewing a file with his name on it, a file that had been growing thicker by the week, filled with quiet observations about a single father named Daniel Reyes, who had no idea he was being watched, evaluated, and considered for something far greater than he could ever have imagined. Saturday arrived faster than Daniel expected, and by the time evening came, his small house smelled of roasted chicken and warm bread. Mia had insisted on helping set the table, carefully placing napkins beside each plate, and arranging a small vase of flowers she had picked from the garden that morning. Daniel watched her with a smile, grateful for the joy this simple dinner seemed to bring her. When the doorbell rang, Mia ran to answer it before Daniel could stop her, throwing the door open to reveal Ruth standing on the porch, dressed a little more neatly than before, though still in the same worn coat. She carried a small paper bag in her hands. I brought something for dessert, Ruth said, holding up the bag. Nothing extravagant, just a few pastries from the bakery down the street. You did not have to do that, Daniel said, taking the bag from her with a grateful smile. Come in, please. Dinner is almost ready. Ruth stepped inside, glancing around the modest but tidy living room with an expression that seemed almost nostalgic. Family photographs lined the walls, most of them featuring Mia at various ages, along with a few older pictures of a woman Daniel guessed must have been his late wife. You have a lovely home, Ruth said softly. Thank you. It is small, but it is ours, Daniel replied, leading her toward the dining table. Please, sit down. Mia has been looking forward to this all week. Throughout dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Mia talked about school, about her friends, about a class project involving painting the solar system. Ruth listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and offering gentle encouragement whenever Mia seemed unsure of herself. You have quite an imagination, Ruth told her at one point. Never let anyone convince you to shrink it down to fit inside a smaller box. Mia grinned, clearly pleased with the compliment, though she did not fully understand its depth. Daniel, however, caught the weight behind the words and found himself studying Ruth more closely. There was wisdom in the way she spoke, the kind that came only from years of experience, from having lived a full and complicated life. After dinner, while Mia went to fetch a drawing she wanted to show their guest, Daniel and Ruth sat together in the living room, the quiet hum of the evening settling comfortably around them. Can I ask you something personal? Daniel said, keeping his tone gentle. Ruth nodded. You may ask. I cannot promise I will answer everything, but you may ask. Do you have family nearby? Anyone who checks in on you? A shadow passed briefly over Ruth's face before she composed herself. I have people who care about me, in their own way. But family, in the way you mean, the kind that shares dinner and asks about your day, that has been missing from my life for a long time. Daniel felt a pang of sympathy. I am sorry to hear that. Do not be sorry, Ruth said, waving a hand gently. Life takes strange turns. I have made my peace with most of them. Besides, sitting here tonight, with you and your daughter, has reminded me of things I thought I had forgotten how to feel. Before Daniel could respond, Mia returned with her drawing, a colorful depiction of their small family standing beneath a bright sun, with an extra figure added off to the side that Daniel had not seen before. Who is this? He asked, pointing to the new addition. Mia looked up at Ruth with a shy smile. That is you. I thought you should be in the picture too. Ruth's eyes glistened as she studied the drawing, tracing the crayon lines with her fingertip. This is the kindest gift anyone has given me in a very long time, she said quietly. Thank you, Mia. That evening marked the beginning of a friendship that grew steadily over the following weeks. Ruth began appearing more regularly in their lives, sometimes joining them for a simple meal, other times simply sitting on a bench near the park when Daniel picked Mia up from school, always with a kind word and a patient smile. Daniel's co-workers at the hardware store noticed the change in his routine. One afternoon, while restocking shelves, his friend Oliver leaned against the counter with a teasing grin. "So who is this mystery woman you keep talking about?" Oliver asked. "The guys in the back room are saying you have adopted a grandmother." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Her name is Ruth. She is just someone I met who needed a little help. Mia adores her." "That is sweet, man. Really," Oliver said, though his tone carried a hint of concern. "Just be careful. Not everyone who seems kind actually is. You do not know anything about her past." "I know enough," Daniel replied simply. "I know she is lonely, and I know that spending time with her makes both me and Mia happy. That is enough for me." Oliver held up his hands in surrender. "Fair enough. Just looking out for you, that is all." Daniel appreciated his friend's concern, but he did not share the same worry. There was nothing about Ruth that felt dangerous or dishonest. If anything, spending time with her felt like a quiet gift, a reminder that kindness could still exist, in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. What Daniel did not know was that Ruth had been quietly gathering more than just memories during their time together. She had begun making careful inquiries around town, speaking with neighbors, former co-workers, even Mia's teacher, always under the guise of simple curiosity about the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. She learned about the accident that had taken Elena's life 3 years earlier, about the months Daniel had spent struggling to balance grief with the responsibility of raising a young daughter alone. She learned about the extra shifts he took at work to cover unexpected expenses, about the nights he stayed up late helping Mia with homework despite his own exhaustion, about the way he never complained, never sought sympathy, simply carried his burdens with quiet determination. Each piece of information confirmed what Ruth had suspected from the very beginning, that Daniel Reyes possessed a rare and genuine kindness, the kind that could not be manufactured or performed for an audience. It was simply who he was, woven into the fabric of his character. One evening, as autumn began giving way to the first signs of winter, Ruth sat across from Daniel at his kitchen table, while Mia worked on a school project in the next room. The conversation had drifted toward lighter topics, but Ruth seemed unusually thoughtful, her eyes distant, as though weighing something important in her mind. "Daniel," she said finally, "I want you to know that meeting you and Mia has meant more to me than you could possibly understand. In this stage of my life, I have grown accustomed to people wanting something from me, whether they realize it or not, but you have never asked me for anything." Daniel looked at her, confused by the weight in her words. "I never expected anything from you, Ruth. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted something in return." "I know," Ruth said softly. "That is precisely why it matters so much." She reached across the table and gently patted his hand, a gesture filled with quiet gratitude. "There may come a day when you learn things about me that surprise you. When that day comes, I hope you will remember that everything I have felt during our time together has been genuine. None of it was pretense." Daniel felt a flicker of confusion at her words but chose not to press further, sensing that Ruth was not yet ready to share whatever burden she carried. Instead, he simply nodded and offered a reassuring smile. "Whatever it is, Ruth, I hope you know you can trust me. Mia and we care about you. That will not change." Ruth smiled, though there was a sadness behind her eyes that Daniel could not quite interpret. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know." As the weeks continued, their bond deepened further. Ruth attended one of Mia's school events, sitting proudly in the audience as the young girl performed a small role in a class play about the seasons changing. She brought a small gift afterward, a beautifully illustrated book about the night sky, inscribed with a handwritten note that read, "For a girl whose imagination reaches as far as the stars." Mia treasured the gift, keeping it on her nightstand and reading a page from it every night before bed. Daniel noticed how much lighter his daughter seemed since Ruth had entered their lives, how her laughter came more easily, how the quiet sadness that had lingered since her mother's passing seemed to soften with each passing week. For Daniel himself, Ruth's presence brought an unexpected sense of peace. Talking with her felt different from talking with anyone else in his life. She listened without judgment, offered wisdom without condescension, and somehow always knew exactly what to say to ease the weight he carried on his shoulders. He began to consider her not just as a friend, but as something closer to family. The grandmother figure Mia had never truly had the chance to know. He found himself looking forward to their visits, to the quiet evenings spent together, to the sound of Ruth's gentle laughter filling his once too quiet home. Then, without warning, everything changed. It started on an ordinary Tuesday, when Daniel drove past the park expecting to see Ruth sitting on her usual bench, only to find it empty. He thought little of it at first, assuming she had simply decided to stay indoors due to the colder weather. But when she did not appear the following day, or the day after that, a quiet worry began to settle in his chest. He tried the small apartment building near the old library where he had once dropped her off, only to be told by the building manager that no one by the name of Ruth had ever lived there. Confused, Daniel pressed further, describing her appearance, her voice, the coat she always wore, but the manager simply shook his head, insisting he had never seen anyone matching that description. Daniel returned home that evening with a growing sense of unease. He checked with Nathan at the gas station, hoping the young cashier might remember something useful, but Nathan only shrugged and said he had not seen the old woman since that first evening months ago. Mia noticed her father's distraction over dinner that night, picking at her food while watching him with worried eyes. "Daddy, where is Ruth? Is she okay?" Daniel forced a reassuring smile, though inside he felt anything but certain. "I am sure she is fine, sweetheart. Maybe she just needed some time to herself. We will see her again soon." But as the days turned into a full week, and then two, Daniel's reassurances began to feel hollow even to himself. He asked around the neighborhood, described Ruth to shop owners and passers-by, even considered contacting local shelters in case she had fallen on harder times. No one seemed to know anything about a woman named Ruth matching her description. It was as though she had vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but questions and an aching sense of loss that neither Daniel nor Mia had expected to feel so deeply. Late one evening, after Mia had finally fallen asleep despite her worry, Daniel sat alone in the living room, staring at the drawing Mia had made months earlier, the one depicting their small family with Ruth, standing proudly beside them. He traced the crayon lines with his finger, wondering what had happened to the gentle old woman who had so quietly woven herself into their lives. He thought back to her strange words from weeks before, about people learning surprising things about her, about hoping he would remember her feelings had always been genuine. At the time, he had dismissed the comment as simply the musings of a lonely woman reflecting on her past. Now, sitting in the quiet of his living room, those words felt heavier, more significant, as though they had been a warning of something yet to come. He had no way of knowing that, at that very moment, Ruth was lying peacefully in a private hospital room across town, surrounded by a small group of trusted advisors and legal representatives, finalizing decisions that would soon bring incredible and unexpected changes into Daniel and Mia's lives. Nor did he know that the woman he had grown to care for so deeply was not simply Ruth, a lonely elderly woman with no family, but someone whose true identity carried far greater weight and consequence than he could ever have imagined. For now, all Daniel knew was the quiet ache of her absence, and the unanswered question that kept him awake long into the night. Where had Ruth gone, and why had she disappeared so suddenly from their lives? 3 weeks passed without a single sign of Ruth, and the silence had begun to weigh heavily on the small household. Daniel found himself checking the park bench every morning on his way to work, half expecting to see her sitting there wrapped in her worn coat, ready to greet him with that familiar warm smile. Each time the bench remained empty, a small piece of hope inside him quietly faded. Mia had stopped asking about Ruth out loud, though Daniel could see the question lingering behind her eyes every time they passed the park or drove near the old library. She had taken to sleeping with the illustrated book about the night sky pressed against her chest, as though holding on to the gift might somehow bring its giver back. At work, Daniel struggled to keep his mind on his tasks. Oliver noticed the change immediately, pulling him aside during a quiet moment in the storage room. "You still have not heard anything?" Oliver asked, concern evident in his voice. "Nothing," Daniel admitted, rubbing a hand across his tired face. "It is like she disappeared into thin air. I checked with the police, but since she is an adult with no reported family, there is not much they can do, unless there is evidence of harm. Maybe she just moved on, Oliver offered gently. Some people do that. They come into your life for a season, and then leave just as quietly as they arrived. Daniel shook his head firmly. That does not feel right. She would not have left without saying goodbye. Not to Mia. She cared too much about her to just vanish without a word. Oliver placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. Then keep looking, if that is what your heart tells you to do. But do not let it consume you completely. You still have a daughter who needs you here, fully present, not lost in worry. Daniel appreciated the advice, even if it did little to ease the ache in his chest. He resolved to continue his search in whatever spare moments he could find, driven by a need to understand what had happened to the woman who had become such an important part of their lives. He revisited the gas station where they had first met, hoping perhaps Nathan had remembered something new. The young cashier shook his head apologetically. I am sorry, man. I really do not know anything else. She just showed up that one night and then you helped her, and that was kind of it. I never saw her come in again. Daniel thanked him anyway and stepped back outside into the cold evening air, feeling the familiar frustration of another dead end. He stood for a long moment beside his car, staring at the spot where he had first noticed Ruth swaying on her feet, replaying that memory over and over, searching for any detail he might have missed. It was during one of these quiet evenings of reflection that Daniel began to notice small inconsistencies he had previously overlooked. He remembered how Ruth always seemed to know more about him than he had ever directly shared. Small details about his work schedule, about Elena, about Mia's school activities. At the time, he had assumed these were simply things she had picked up through casual conversation. Now, looking back, he wondered if there had been something more deliberate behind her careful questions. He also remembered the strange, almost formal way she sometimes spoke, her vocabulary occasionally slipping into phrases that felt out of place for someone who appeared to be struggling financially. There had been a dignity to her presence that went beyond simple politeness, something that spoke of education, of experience with a very different kind of life than the one she had presented to him. None of these observations made sense on their own, but together they painted a picture of someone far more complex than the lonely elderly woman he had first met at the gas station. Daniel found himself both worried and curious, torn between concern for her safety and a growing suspicion that there was far more to Ruth's story than she had ever revealed. He considered these thoughts one evening while sitting on the porch after tucking Mia into bed, watching the quiet street in front of his house, illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. The autumn air had turned distinctly cold, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. He wrapped his jacket tighter around himself and allowed his mind to wander through every conversation he had shared with Ruth, searching for any clue that might explain her sudden disappearance. He thought about her comment weeks earlier, about people learning surprising things about her, about hoping he would remember her feelings had been genuine. The words echoed in his mind with new significance now, carrying a weight that felt almost like a farewell, though he had not recognized it as such at the time. Had she known, even then, that their time together was limited? Had she been preparing him, in her own quiet way, for whatever was coming next? Daniel had no answers, only questions that multiplied with each passing day. He continued his routine as best he could, focusing on Mia, on work, on the small daily tasks that kept their household running smoothly. But beneath the surface, a persistent unease remained, a feeling that something significant was unfolding just beyond his awareness. 4 weeks after Ruth's disappearance, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Daniel was in the backyard raking fallen leaves, while Mia played nearby with a small group of neighborhood children. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the yard, and for a moment, the peaceful scene allowed him to forget, if only briefly, the worry that had settled into his daily thoughts. That peace was interrupted by the low hum of an engine pulling into his driveway, unfamiliar and distinctly out of place among the modest cars typically seen on his street. Daniel looked up from his work to see a sleek black car coming to a smooth stop at the curb, its polished exterior reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Mia paused her game, watching curiously as the car door opened and a well-dressed woman stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase and moving with the confident, purposeful stride of someone accustomed to important business. "Mr. Reyes?" the woman called out, approaching the low fence that separated the yard from the sidewalk. "Daniel Reyes?" Daniel set down his rake, wiping his hands on his jeans as he walked toward her. a mixture of curiosity and caution settling in his chest. Yes, that is me. Can I help you with something? The woman offered a polite, professional smile, though her eyes carried an expression Daniel could not quite place, something between sympathy and solemn respect. My name is Grace Whitmore. I am an attorney, and I represent the estate of a client who recently passed away. I need to speak with you regarding some important matters, if you have a moment. A cold, uneasy feeling settled in the pit of Daniel's stomach. Passed away? I am sorry, but I do not understand. Who exactly are you representing? Grace glanced briefly at Mia, who had abandoned her game entirely and was now standing close to her father, sensing the seriousness of the conversation despite not fully understanding its content. Perhaps it would be best if we spoke privately, Grace suggested gently. This concerns some rather significant matters, and I believe it would be easier to explain indoors. Daniel felt his heart quicken, an instinctive sense of dread mixing with a flicker of understanding that refused to fully form in his mind. He glanced down at Mia, who looked up at him with wide, questioning eyes. Sweetheart, why do not you go inside and wash up for a snack? I will be there in just a few minutes. Mia hesitated, clearly wanting to know more, but the seriousness in her father's tone convinced her to comply. She cast one more curious glance at the well-dressed stranger before heading toward the house, the screen door creaking softly as it closed behind her. Once she was safely inside, Daniel turned back to Grace, his expression now openly troubled. Please, tell me what is going on. Who passed away? Why does it concern me? Grace took a slow breath, her professional composure softening slightly as she prepared to deliver news she clearly understood would be difficult to hear. Mr. Reyes, I believe you knew my client by the name Ruth. The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath Daniel's feet. Ruth, he repeated quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. She passed away? When? How? She passed peacefully, 2 weeks ago, surrounded by people who cared for her deeply, Grace explained gently. I understand this must come as a significant shock, especially given how suddenly she disappeared from your life. There is a great deal I need to explain to you, Mr. Reyes, and I believe it would be best if we sat down together. Daniel felt a heavy weight settle over him, grief mixing with confusion in equal measure. He had feared something might have happened to Ruth during her unexplained absence, but hearing the confirmation still struck him with unexpected force. He thought of Mia inside the house, of the drawing she had made, of the illustrated book she still kept pressed against her chest each night, and his chest tightened with sorrow for the loss his daughter would soon have to process. Please, he said quietly, gesturing toward the front porch. Come inside. I want to understand everything. As they walked toward the house together, Daniel's mind raced with unanswered questions. Who exactly had Ruth been? Why had an attorney been sent to speak with him following her passing? And what significant matters could possibly connect his quiet, ordinary life to the death of a woman he had believed to be nothing more than a lonely, elderly stranger he had chosen to help on an otherwise unremarkable evening? He held the door open for Grace, casting one final glance toward the empty driveway before stepping inside, unaware that the answers awaiting him would reveal a truth far larger and more extraordinary than anything he could have imagined during the quiet months he had spent building a friendship with the woman he had known simply as Ruth. Inside, Mia sat quietly at the kitchen table, a glass of juice untouched in front of her, her young eyes watching the door with an anxious curiosity that mirrored her father's own uncertainty. Daniel offered her a reassuring smile, though he felt anything but reassured himself, and gestured for Grace to take a seat at the table across from them. Mia, Daniel said softly, kneeling briefly beside his daughter's chair. This is Miss Whitmore. She has some important news to share with us about Ruth. Mia's small face fell immediately, sensing the weight behind her father's gentle tone. Is Ruth okay? Daniel exchanged a brief, sorrowful glance with Grace before turning back to his daughter, choosing his words carefully. Ruth passed away, sweetheart. I am so sorry. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, and she reached instinctively for her father's hand, seeking comfort in the familiar warmth of his presence. Daniel pulled her close, holding her gently as she processed the difficult news, his own heart aching with a grief he had not expected to feel so deeply for a woman he had known for such a relatively short time. Grace waited patiently, allowing them a moment to absorb the news before continuing. I understand this is incredibly difficult, and I am deeply sorry for your loss, but there is more I need to share with you. Information that I believe will help explain not only who Ruth truly was, but also why her passing carries such significant meaning for both of you." Daniel looked up, still holding Mia close, his expression a mixture of grief and growing curiosity. "Please, go ahead. I think we are ready to hear it." Grace opened her leather briefcase and withdrew a neatly organized folder, placing it carefully on the table between them. "Mr. Reyes, the woman you knew as Ruth, was not simply an elderly stranger in need of kindness. Her full name was Eleanor Whitfield, and she was, until her passing, one of the most respected philanthropists in this region, known for her quiet, unassuming approach to charitable work." Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat, memories flooding back of Ruth's occasionally formal speech, her careful questions, the dignity that had always seemed slightly out of place given her humble appearance. Pieces of a puzzle he had not even realized he was assembling began clicking gently into place. "I do not understand," Daniel said slowly. "Why would someone like that pretend to be homeless? Why would she approach a complete stranger at a gas station and allow him to believe she needed charity?" Grace offered a small, understanding smile. "That, Mr. Reyes, is precisely what I am here to explain." Grace folded her hands over the folder, choosing her words with the careful precision of someone accustomed to explaining complicated matters to people still processing unexpected grief. Eleanor Whitfield built her fortune many years ago, initially through a modest family business that grew into a much larger enterprise over the following decades. But those who knew her well would tell you that her true passion was never the business itself, but rather what the success allowed her to do for others. Daniel listened intently, still holding Mia close, though his daughter had quieted somewhat, her curiosity now mingling with her grief as she listened to the unfolding explanation. "Over the years," Grace continued, "Eleanor established a private foundation dedicated to supporting families facing hardship, particularly single parents struggling to raise children while managing financial and emotional burdens on their own. She funded scholarships, housing assistance programs, and community resources, always working quietly behind the scenes, avoiding public recognition whenever possible." "But why the disguise?" Daniel asked, still struggling to reconcile the image of the frail, humble woman he had known with the powerful philanthropist Grace was describing. "Why pretend to need help herself?" Grace nodded, as though she had anticipated this question. Eleanor believed, quite firmly, that true character reveals itself most clearly in moments when people believe no one of consequence is watching. Over the years, she grew increasingly troubled by how often people would perform kindness for the sake of recognition or reward, rather than out of genuine compassion. She wanted to find individuals who embodied real, unwavering kindness, people who would help a stranger, not because of who that stranger might turn out to be, but simply because helping was the right thing to do. Daniel felt a heavy weight settle in his chest as understanding began to dawn, so she disguised herself, deliberately, to test people. "In a sense, yes," Grace confirmed gently, though I do not believe test is quite the right word for what she was seeking. She was searching for genuine goodness, the kind that exists without an audience, without expectation. Over the past several months, Eleanor visited a number of communities throughout the region, presenting herself as someone in need, observing how people responded to her. "And most people ignored her," Daniel said quietly, remembering the way Nathan had dismissed her at the gas station, the way other customers in the store that evening had barely glanced in her direction. "Most people did," Grace confirmed with a note of sadness in her voice, "which made your response all the more significant to her. From the very first moment you stepped forward to help her, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return, Eleanor recognized something rare in your character." Mia, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up, her voice small but curious. "Ruth was testing my daddy?" Grace offered the young girl a gentle, reassuring smile. "Not testing in an unkind way, sweetheart. She was simply looking for someone special, someone with a truly kind heart. And when she found your father, she realized very quickly that she had found exactly what she had been searching for." Daniel shook his head slowly, still processing the magnitude of what he was hearing. But why continue the friendship for so many months? If she had already found what she was looking for that first evening, why maintain the disguise for so long? Grace's expression softened further, and for the first time since arriving, a hint of genuine emotion crept into her professional demeanor. "Because, Mr. Reyes, What began as an evaluation quickly became something far more meaningful to her. Eleanor spoke of you and Mia often during her final weeks. She spoke of the dinners you shared, of Mia's artwork, of the quiet comfort she found in your home despite everything she possessed elsewhere. I believe, quite genuinely, that the friendship she built with you and your daughter became one of the most cherished relationships of her final years. Daniel felt tears welling in his own eyes now, the grief he had been holding back finally breaking through as he absorbed the full weight of Grace's words. He thought back to that evening at his kitchen table, to Ruth's hand resting gently over his own, to her words about hoping he would remember her feelings had always been genuine. She meant it, Daniel said softly, more to himself than to Grace. Everything she said, she meant it. Every word, Grace confirmed. Eleanor Whitfield was many things throughout her remarkable life, but during the time she spent with you and Mia, she was, above everything else, genuinely happy. She often remarked that your home felt more like family than anywhere else she had known in years. A comfortable, if bittersweet silence settled over the kitchen as Daniel absorbed this revelation, his hand instinctively finding Mia's shoulder, offering comfort even as he sought comfort himself. After a moment, Grace continued, opening the folder before her and withdrawing several official-looking documents. There is one more matter I need to discuss with you, Mr. Reyes. One that I believe requires your careful consideration. Daniel wiped his eyes and straightened slightly, bracing himself for whatever came next. Go ahead. Before her passing, Eleanor made significant revisions to her will and to the charter governing her foundation, Grace explained, sliding the documents across the table. She specifically named you, Mr. Reyes, as a key figure in a new initiative she wished to establish, one focused on providing meaningful support to single parents throughout this region. Daniel stared at the documents without immediately reaching for them, his mind struggling to process the implications of what Grace was describing. I do not understand. Why me? I never asked for anything from her. That is precisely why she chose you, Grace said with a small, knowing smile. Eleanor was very clear in her instructions. She wanted someone who understood, firsthand, the daily struggles faced by single parents, someone who could speak authentically to the challenges involved, and someone whose character had already proven itself worthy of trust and respect. She believed you were uniquely suited to help guide this initiative in a way that would genuinely serve the community it was designed to support. What exactly would this involve? Daniel asked cautiously, still hesitant to fully embrace what was being offered. Grace gestured toward the documents. The foundation intends to establish a community center specifically designed to support single parents, offering resources such as child care assistance, educational scholarships, job training programs, and emergency housing support. Eleanor specified that you would serve as an advisory figure for this initiative, working alongside the foundation's existing staff to ensure the programs genuinely address the needs of families in similar situations to your own. And financially, Grace continued gently, Eleanor also made a personal provision within her will, establishing a trust fund intended to secure both your and Mia's futures, including a fund dedicated specifically to Mia's education, ensuring she would have access to whatever opportunities she wished to pursue as she grows older. Daniel sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was being described. Mia, sensing her father's hesitation, tugged gently at his sleeve. Daddy, is this a good thing? Daniel looked down at his daughter, his heart swelling with a complicated mixture of grief, gratitude, and lingering disbelief. I think it might be, sweetheart. I just need a moment to understand it all. He turned back to Grace, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate everything you have shared with me, truly. But I want to be honest with you. I never helped Ruth because I expected anything in return. The idea of accepting this kind of gift feels uncomfortable to me, almost as though it changes the meaning of what we shared. Grace nodded, her expression understanding rather than surprised. I anticipated you might feel this way, Mr. Reyes. In fact, Eleanor herself anticipated it as well. She left a personal letter for you, one she asked me to deliver only after explaining the full situation. She reached into her briefcase once more and withdrew a sealed envelope, handing it carefully across the table. Daniel took it with trembling hands, recognizing immediately the same elegant handwriting that had once accompanied the gift of an illustrated book about the night sky. Would you like a moment alone to read it? Grace asked gently. Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Yes, Thank you. Grace rose from her seat with a respectful nod, gathering her briefcase. Take whatever time you need, Mr. Reyes. I will step outside and wait, whenever you are ready to continue our conversation. Once Grace had stepped out onto the porch, Daniel carefully opened the envelope, his hand still trembling slightly as he unfolded the letter within. Mia leaned close beside him, watching quietly as her father began to read the elegant handwriting that filled the page. My dear Daniel, the letter began, if you are reading this, then I have already passed from this world, though I hope the memories we built together during these past months remain vivid and warm within your heart, as they certainly do within mine. When I first approached you at that gas station, hungry, cold, and pretending to need far more than I actually did, I never expected to find what I found in you and your daughter. I had grown weary, over the years, of searching for genuine kindness within a world that so often rewards performance over sincerity. I had nearly convinced myself that such kindness no longer existed in any meaningful way. You proved me wrong within moments of our very first meeting. What began as a simple evaluation of your character quickly became something far more precious to me. The evenings we spent together, the dinners shared around your table, Mia's laughter filling rooms that had grown too quiet in my own life, these became gifts I never expected to receive during the final chapter of my journey. I know that accepting what I have left for you may feel uncomfortable, perhaps even wrong, given the genuine nature of the friendship we built together. Please understand, Daniel, that this gift is not payment for kindness, for true kindness cannot be purchased or repaid in such simple terms. Rather, consider it an opportunity, a chance for you to extend the same compassion you showed me to countless other families who desperately need someone exactly like you in their corner. Mia deserves every opportunity this world can offer her, and I hope what I have arranged will help ensure she never has to face unnecessary hardship in pursuing her dreams. And you, Daniel, deserve recognition for the quiet, unwavering strength you have shown every single day since losing Elena, strength that Mia will carry with her throughout her entire life, because of the example you have set. Please do not mourn my passing with sorrow alone. Instead, I hope you will remember our time together, with the same warmth and gratitude I carried within my own heart during those final months. You gave me something far more valuable than any fortune could ever measure. You gave me genuine family, even if only for a short while. Take care of each other, always. With deepest gratitude and affection, Eleanor. Daniel finished reading, tears streaming freely down his face, as Mia wrapped her small arms around him, offering comfort even as her own tears fell onto his shoulder. They sat together in silence for several long minutes, absorbing the full weight of Eleanor's words, understanding now, with complete clarity, just how deeply their brief friendship with the woman they had known as Ruth had touched all three of their lives. When Daniel finally composed himself enough to speak, he looked down at his daughter with a gentle, determined expression. I think we should honor what she asked of us, Mia, not because of the money, but because of everything she believed about us, about kindness, about family. I think we owe it to her memory to make sure other families receive the same warmth she found in ours. Mia nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Ruth would want that. I know she would. Together they rose from the table and walked toward the front door, ready to invite Grace back inside, ready to begin understanding fully what accepting Eleanor's final wishes would mean for their future, and for the futures of countless other families who would soon benefit from the extraordinary kindness of a woman who had once pretended to have nothing at all. The months that followed brought changes to Daniel and Mia's life that neither of them could have fully anticipated, though they navigated each new development with the same quiet determination that had carried them through the difficult years since Elena's passing. Grace continued to visit periodically, guiding Daniel through the legal and financial details involved in accepting Eleanor's final wishes, patiently answering his many questions and helping him understand exactly what his new role within the foundation would require. At first, Daniel felt overwhelmed by the responsibility placed upon him. He was, after all, simply a hardware store manager who had spent years focused on nothing more complicated than restocking shelves and managing daily inventory. The idea of stepping into a role advising a major charitable foundation felt almost impossibly distant from his ordinary life. But as he began meeting with the foundation's existing staff, a dedicated group of individuals who had worked alongside Eleanor for years, Daniel discovered that his lack of formal experience mattered far less than his genuine understanding of the struggles facing single parents. He spoke from experience about the exhaustion of working long hours while still finding energy to help with homework, about the anxiety of unexpected expenses arising during months already stretched thin, about the quiet loneliness that could settle in during evenings spent parenting entirely alone. His insights proved invaluable as the foundation began designing the new community center Eleanor had envisioned. Rather than simply offering generic assistance programs, Daniel helped shape resources that addressed the specific, practical challenges he understood intimately. Flexible childcare options for parents working irregular hours, mentorship programs pairing experienced single parents with those just beginning their journey, and emergency assistance funds designed to respond quickly to unexpected financial hardships without the lengthy bureaucratic delays common in many assistance programs. Oliver, upon learning the full story from Daniel one evening over coffee, sat in stunned silence for several long moments before finally shaking his head in disbelief. "I told you to be careful about a mysterious woman with no known past," he said with a small, incredulous laugh. "I never imagined this is what I meant." Daniel smiled, though the expression carried a bittersweet quality. "Neither did I, honestly. I still find myself thinking it might all be some strange dream sometimes." "How is Mia handling everything?" Oliver asked, his tone growing more serious. "Better than I expected," Daniel admitted. "She still misses Ruth deeply. We both do. But I think there is comfort in knowing that the friendship we shared with her was completely real, even if the circumstances surrounding it were far more complicated than we realized at the time." Mia, for her part, had taken to keeping Eleanor's letter in a small wooden box on her nightstand, alongside the illustrated book about the night sky and the drawing she had once made depicting their family, with an extra figure added off to the side. She would occasionally take the letter out and ask her father to read it aloud again, listening with quiet reverence to the words Eleanor had written specifically for them. "Do you think she can see us now?" Mia asked one evening as Daniel tucked her into bed, the illustrated book resting open on her lap. Daniel considered the question carefully before answering, wanting to offer his daughter comfort without overstepping into promises he could not truly know to be accurate. "I like to think she can, sweetheart. And I think if she can, she is probably very proud of how you have handled everything." Mia smiled softly, closing the book and setting it gently on her nightstand. "I am proud of you too, Daddy, for helping other families the way you helped Ruth." Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion, leaning down to kiss his daughter's forehead before turning off her bedroom light. "We are helping them together, Mia. Never forget that this is your legacy too, not just mine." As winter gave way to spring, construction began on the new community center, situated on a quiet plot of land, not far from the park where Daniel and Ruth had first reconnected after their initial meeting at the gas station. Daniel visited the construction site regularly, watching with a mixture of pride and disbelief as the building slowly took shape, transforming from architectural blueprints into a tangible structure that would soon serve countless families throughout the community. Grace remained closely involved throughout the process, her professional demeanor gradually softening into genuine friendship as she and Daniel worked together toward the shared goal of honoring Eleanor's final wishes. She often remarked on how struck she had been by Daniel's humility throughout the entire process, noting that many people in his position might have allowed the sudden wealth and responsibility to change them, yet Daniel remained remarkably grounded, always more focused on the needs of the families the center would serve than on any personal benefit he might receive. "Eleanor chose well," Grace told him one afternoon as they walked together through the nearly completed building, examining the bright, welcoming spaces designed specifically for children and their parents. "I do not think she could have found anyone better suited to carry forward her vision." Daniel accepted the compliment with characteristic modesty. "I just want to make sure we build something that genuinely helps people, something that reflects who she truly was, not the disguise she wore, but the compassionate woman underneath it." Finally, after months of careful planning and construction, the day arrived for the official opening of what the foundation had decided to name the Eleanor Whitfield Family Center, a name chosen specifically to honor the woman whose quiet generosity had made the entire project possible. The ceremony took place on a warm spring afternoon, with a modest but meaningful gathering of community members, foundation staff, and local families who would soon benefit from the center's many programs. Daniel stood near the entrance, dressed in his best suit, feeling a familiar nervousness settle in his stomach as he prepared to speak publicly for the first time about his experience with Eleanor. Mia stood beside him, holding tightly to his hand, dressed in a simple blue dress and clutching the illustrated book about the night sky against her chest, having insisted on bringing it along for this important occasion. When the time came for Daniel to speak, he stepped forward hesitantly, clearing his throat as he addressed the small crowd gathered before him. "I never expected to be standing here today," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident beneath his words. "A little over a year ago, I was simply a father trying my best to raise my daughter alone, working hard, making ends meet, and trying to teach her the same values my late wife and I always believed in: kindness without expectation, compassion without conditions." He paused, glancing briefly toward Mia, who offered him an encouraging smile. "I met a woman one evening at a local gas station, someone who appeared to need help, someone I chose to assist simply because it felt like the right thing to do. I had no idea, at the time, that this simple act of kindness would eventually lead to everything you see standing before you today." Daniel continued, sharing carefully selected details about his friendship with the woman he had known as Ruth, about the months they had spent building genuine trust and affection, about the profound sense of loss he and Mia had experienced upon learning of her true identity and subsequent passing. "Eleanor Whitfield taught me something important during our time together," he continued, his voice growing steadier with each passing moment. "She taught me that true kindness never asks questions about who deserves it or what might be gained in return. She spent her final months searching for genuine compassion within our community, and I believe, more than anything, that this center represents her hope that such compassion continues to grow and spread throughout future generations." He gestured toward the building behind him, its bright windows reflecting the warm spring sunlight. "This center exists to support families like mine, single parents working hard every single day to give their children the best possible life despite whatever challenges they face. I hope that every family who walks through these doors feels the same warmth and acceptance that Eleanor once showed to my daughter and me, without ever revealing who she truly was." As Daniel concluded his remarks, the gathered crowd applauded warmly, many wiping away tears of their own, moved by the sincerity evident in his words. Mia stepped forward beside him, holding up the illustrated book for the crowd to see. "Ruth gave me this book," she said, her young voice carrying clearly across the quiet gathering. "She told me my imagination should reach as far as the stars. I think this center will help lots of kids reach for their own stars too." The crowd's applause grew warmer still, touched by the young girl's simple yet profound words. Grace, standing near the front of the gathering, wiped a tear from her own eye, having grown genuinely fond of both Daniel and Mia throughout the months of preparation leading up to this moment. Following the ceremony, as families began exploring the center's various rooms and resources, Daniel found a quiet moment to step outside, standing alone beneath a newly planted tree near the entrance, a small plaque at its base bearing Eleanor's name, alongside a simple inscription reading, "For those who choose kindness without expecting anything in return." He thought back to that cold evening at the gas station, to the moment he had stepped forward without hesitation to help a stranger in need, never imagining the extraordinary journey that single decision would eventually set into motion. He thought about Elena, about how proud she would have been to see the values they had once shared together, continuing to shape both his life and their daughter's future. Mia joined him a few minutes later, slipping her small hand into his, as they stood together beneath the tree, watching families move happily through the building behind them. "Do you think this is what Ruth wanted?" Mia asked softly. Daniel smiled, pulling his daughter close against his side. "I think this is exactly what she wanted, sweetheart. A place where kindness gets to keep growing, long after the person who planted the seed is gone." They stood together in comfortable silence for several more minutes, watching as the community center buzzed with quiet activity, a testament to the enduring power of genuine compassion and the unexpected ways in which a single act of kindness could ripple outward, touching countless lives in ways neither Daniel nor Ruth could have fully predicted on that ordinary, cold evening when their paths first crossed at a small gas station on the edge of town. As the sun began to set over the newly opened center, casting warm, golden light across its welcoming entrance, Daniel realized that while he had lost a cherished friend, he had gained something equally precious, A renewed understanding that true kindness, offered freely and without condition, held the power to change not just individual lives, but entire communities. One genuine act of compassion at a time. And somewhere, he liked to believe, Eleanor Whitfield was watching, finally at peace, having found exactly what she had spent her final years searching for, undeniable proof that genuine goodness still existed in the world, quietly waiting to be discovered in the most unexpected of places.